Albert Bell was an Eagle Scout. Wait, what? Yeah, let me repeat. Albert Bell was an Eagle Scout. In high school, he was a do-gooder, a member of the National Honor Society who took French and excelled in math and graduated 6th in a class of 266. Which, of course, makes no sense at all, because Albert Bell today isn't in the baseball zeitgeist largely because of personal reasons. Which ones? Take your pick. His paranoia, his holding of long-standing grudges against media members, or, probably worst of all, his violent streak. It's one thing when a child who weighs 40 pounds has a public meltdown, and a whole other thing when the tantrum thrower is 6'2" and 210 pounds of pure muscle, who can swing a wooden bat with more power than nearly anybody alive. That kind of person is a potential danger to those around them, not an Eagle Scout. Yet, Bell somehow was both at the same time. Two people tightly wrapped into a body designed to do maximum damage to a baseball, and anything else that was in his path when he was raging. Making sense of Bell's career probably requires a background in both sabermetrics and psychology. From a stats standpoint, Bell's a gift that just keeps on giving. You can parse his career numbers in many fascinating ways. Here's one that really jumps out. For each of the last 8 seasons of his career, between 1993 and 2000, he had more RBIs than strikeouts. Not walks, mind you, RBIs. The guy was arguably as gifted as any with runners on base. Meanwhile, he was also one of the most feared sluggers in the game during his prime, as for 8 straight seasons he had 30 or more homers while driving in over 100 runs. At the time, only 3 other players had a streak that long in MLB history: Babe Ruth, Jimmy Foxx, and Lou Gehrig, legends whose careers all began before integration. Bell is the only player in MLB history to hit 4 doubles in a 9-inning game twice. Bell is the only player in MLB history to hit 50 homers and 50 doubles in a season. 3 times, Bell hit over 300, scored and drove in over 100 runs, and hit over 30 homers in one season. The only player to have ever done this more than 3 times and is not in the Hall of Fame is Barry Bonds. As is well known, Barry didn't need to use PEDs. He was already the best player of his generation when he began the descent to hell that was the doping scandal of the late 1990s and early 2000s. In a similar fashion, Bell didn't need to be a rage-filled pariah, yet some dark force drove these 2 college-educated, articulate, well-informed, and deeply flawed men to mar their legacies in the name of reaching greatness, or, in perhaps Bell's case, achieving revenge. So, what possibly can explain the place Bell occupies in MLB history? How did he end up battling so many demons, even into his 50s, when he was blessed with more ability, both physical and intellectual, than nearly everyone else in the baseball world? Before we get started, let's not pretend like race had nothing to do with it. Several of Bell's most egregious transgressions involved him being subjected to racial slurs prior. As a child of the South, Bell had an enormous weight of hatred pressing down on him. Not everyone responds to this pressure the same. Unless you've walked in his shoes, there's no way to predict how you'd act under the same circumstances. This isn't to say he responded appropriately, mind you, just that things were probably a bit more complicated than were initially reported on. Albert Bell put up average season numbers that got others like Willie Stargell and Hack Wilson voted into the Hall: a .295 career batting average, 40 homers per 162 games, and 130 RBIs. However, there's almost no chance Bell will ever have a plaque in Cooperstown, despite having a slew of the only MLB player kind of stats, due to a bad hip cutting off the back end of his career and even worse press relations. But before he was drumming up controversy, he was a kid from Louisiana, just looking to make his way in the baseball world. But before we dive any deeper into Albert Bell's controversial career, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, MOVA Globes. Their independently rotating globes are the perfect complement to any coffee table or desk side because they literally don't require any technology to rotate. They literally only require light to work because of some really interesting solar cell and magnetic technology. Watch this, you can even do this kind of thing with it, just to prove that it's not rotating or anything like that. And you can even tell based on my setup in here that I don't have the most ambient light available, and yet it's still spinning. On top of that, they have designs for all 30 MLB teams, including a couple commemorative ones. There's also over 40 other designs, including world maps and celestial bodies by JPL and NASA. And today, if you use my discount code MTC10, you can get 10% off a 6 or 8.5 inch globe. It not only is a nice little discount, but it's a great way to show your support for the channel if you're able. Again, that's MTC10 for 10% off a 6 or 8.5 inch globe. Any 6 or 8.5 inch globe. Now, back to our video. Perhaps a key to unraveling Bell is to begin with his name. Until 1990, he was called Joey, since his middle name is Jojuan. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Joey Bell grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, where both of his parents were teachers. In addition to teaching, Joey's father, Albert Bell Sr., was also an assistant baseball coach at Airline High School, who taught both him and his fraternal twin Terry how to play the game. The center of Bell's life were 2 pillars of the Shreveport black community. Joey sang in the choir and became an Eagle Scout with his brother. Both played football and baseball. Both would go with their father to a middle school where he'd pitch them deeper into the night. Shreveport wasn't an easy city to be young and African American. The city was the last capital of the Confederacy, and to this day remains in many ways deeply segregated. Likely no one from Shreveport was surprised when Bell showed anger at times in his life. Growing up there imbued people with a festering sense of injustice. Baseball in Shreveport wasn't taken very seriously. It's football country, where Bell also played and starred in. But it was on the diamond where Joey truly shined. He hit .615 with 9 homers as a senior, being named the state's 4A Player of the Year. He played on the 1984 national team, earning a silver medal in the process. Despite his size, athleticism, and obvious power at the plate, pro scouts weren't beating down his door. Not yet, anyway. Joey matriculated to LSU in 1985, which at the time wasn't the powerhouse it is today. Before Bell's arrival, the school had never even been to the College World Series, much less won a national title. But he managed to get there at the perfect moment, because it was early in Skip Bertman's tenure as manager, who'd go on to win 5 national titles. Unlike the pro scouts who'd passed over Bell completely, Bertman was no fool. He started Bell in his freshman season. By his second year, he was the most dominant player in the SEC, leading the league in homers in 1986 and 1987 with 21 each season. In 1986, he hammered 2 bombs against Tulane to send the Tigers to Omaha for the first time. Even though Bell crushed a homer against the University of Miami, his team got knocked out with a pair of tough 4-3 losses. Wait till next year, except Bell never played again in the College World Series, for reasons that probably need a closer examination. Bell was now a star, one of the best college players in the country, and those guys usually play in summer in the Cape Cod League. Bell joined the Chatham A's, and when he came back to Baton Rouge, he was a bit of a different person. The temper tantrums had begun, throwing helmets and bats after strikeouts. Over the next 2 seasons, Bertman sat Bell down about 15 times for disciplinary reasons, apparently mostly to do with him getting angry over making it out at the plate. At all other times, Bell seemed to be a nice kid and a hard worker. In 1987, Bell again led LSU on a return path to Omaha. But during the SEC tournament, a Mississippi State fan began hurling racial insults at Bell in the outfield. Bell didn't ignore the hatred. He went chasing after the fan and had to be restrained by teammates. He was, perhaps unfairly, suspended from the team, and never played for LSU again. As the MLB draft approached, Braves bigwig Bobby Cox had a rule: anyone who drafted Joey Bell in any round would get fired, which is why one of the best players in college baseball fell all the way to the 2nd round, where the then Indians nabbed him. Bell returned to the Cape Cod League and played for the Mets alongside Robin Ventura, but Bell got kicked out of the league after multiple run-ins with opposing players, umpires, and fans. After signing, he spent some time in the minors, and then in early 1988 went off to the Mexican League to get ready for his first season of pro ball. But he threw a catcher's mask out of the stadium and was sent packing early, having been ejected from the league and the country. So, what gives? Bell himself said that he expected to be a star by the time he was 21, but instead, he was all the way in A-ball. Each time he made an out, it ate at him. He couldn't control the anger that built up in a game where failure was the norm. A bad temper in a baseball player is a combustible mix, especially when matched with a little physical violence. He made it to the show by 1989, getting his first career hit and RBI off Nolan Ryan. He also stole a base later that inning. In 62 games, he hit .225 with 7 homers and 37 RBIs, a bit of a slow start by his own standards. It would get worse for him before it got better, slumping so badly in the process that he ended up back in AAA, where he became infamous for tearing up bathrooms after a strikeout. Bell sought help. He spent 10 weeks at the Cleveland Clinic for treatment for alcoholism, which surprised many who knew him, but Bell said he'd kept it hidden and only drank to get drunk and drown his troubles. He was self-medicating to handle his inner demons. Here's where his story could have morphed into an inspiring tale of redemption. Coming out of rehab, Bell could have changed, and in one obvious way, he did. He now went by Albert, not Joey. Albert had no track record of breaking things and getting pissed off at the world. Albert was his father's name. In interviews, he claimed to have learned his lesson, that he was a brand new person. Back in the bigs by 1991, Bell finally harnessed his talent, putting up some impressive numbers in the process. On opening day, he took ace Brett Saberhagen deep and didn't slow up for the rest of the year, finishing the season with an OPS plus of 134, while hitting .282 with 28 homers and 95 RBIs. His anger came boiling back, this time against someone not even on the field. You see, after a Cleveland fan yelled out to Bell, "Hey Joey, keg party at my house after the game," Bell proceeded to chuck a baseball into the heckler's chest at max speed, which got him suspended for 6 games following. This may have looked bad on the surface, but the real issue seemed to be that Bell had learned nothing in rehab about regulating his emotions. This incident didn't involve a strikeout or racial insults, something more extenuating. The comment, while mean-spirited, was the kind of thing that happens all the time in baseball. It probably should have rolled off his back, not ended up in the chest of the heckler. As the years wore on and Bell continued to put up productive season after productive season, the question started being pondered. Did Bell's rage drive his performance? Ted Williams used to scream profanities during BP, and that certainly wasn't very nice to reporters. Yet, like the Hulk, his anger seemed to fuel him to greater feats of strength on the baseball field. The same seemed to be true of Bell. The angrier Albert got, the better he hit. And make no mistake, he didn't soften or mellow or seem to grow emotionally as a person. Instead, he became one of the greatest sluggers in history, beginning a reign of terror in 1992 that caused pitchers to cower in fear for the next 8 seasons. He also became the first player in MLB history to make over $10 million in a single year. His streak of 30 homers and 100 RBI began in 1992, when Bell led the Indians to a 20-game jump in the standings. He hit 34 homers that season and drove in 112. He kept improving the next year, with his OPS plus jumping all the way to 145, while leading the majors with 129 runs driven in and another 38 dingers. With Kenny Lofton, Manny Ramirez, Jim Thome, Carlos Baerga, Sandy Alomar Jr., Jose Mesa, and Dennis Martinez, the Indians were becoming a true juggernaut after decades of futility. Along the way, Bell got the name of Snapper, because no one knew when Bell would go off, or for what reason. He snapped at people from all walks of life, from coaches to broadcasters to even fans. But he reserved a special hatred for reporters, the very baseball writers who voted on awards and eventually on the Hall of Fame ballot itself. Needless to say, he wasn't winning any popularity contests in pretty much any of the areas he dwelled in, but he and the Indians were definitely still winning games. The seasons of 1994 and 1995 capture Bell's career with the utmost clarity. In 1994, Bell was gunning to do something that no batter had done since 1967, win the Triple Crown. He was currently second in batting, third in homers, and third in RBIs, as he battled against Frank Thomas, who would eventually go on to win his second consecutive MVP award. But, like all players, the strike ended his 1994 season in August, short-circuiting his incredible year, as well as those by Thomas and Ken Griffey Jr. But Bell's season also came with an additional grain of salt. On July 15th, Chicago asked that Bell's bat be inspected for cork. The umpires had Bell's bats removed to their locker room for safekeeping, so they could inspect them after the contest. But pitcher Jason Grimsley proceeded to slip through a ceiling tile and into the umpire's sanctuary, where he tried to replace Bell's bats with those of Paul Sorrento, whose name was comically etched into each bat. The plan failed, and Bell was suspended for 6 games. Not that it mattered, the next season was shortened to 144 contests, but Bell blasted his way to the best season in his career. In 143 games, he clobbered 50 homers and 50 doubles, something no other player had done before. He drove in 126 runs. His OPS plus was an astronomical 177, in the middle of the steroid era no less. He tied Babe Ruth's record with 17 homers for the month of September. And he led the Indians to the World Series for the first time since 1954. In the ALDS against Boston, Bell hit a game-tying homer in the 11th inning, and Red Sox manager Kevin Kennedy asked the umpires to check his bat. Bell flexed a mighty bicep to show where his power really came from, and he got off scot-free. No cork could be found. After a successful ALCS, it was on to face the Braves and their pitching staff full of Hall of Famers in the World Series. Cleveland quickly got down 2-0 with a pivotal Game 3 waiting, but here, Bell again became his worst enemy. During BP, Bell became so incensed that so many reporters were milling around the dugout that he started screaming at them to leave, using what might be called colorful language. NBC reporter Hannah Storm had an interview with Kenny Lofton, so she stayed. But Bell then continued his tirade but directed it personally at Storm, who was shaken by the incident. He was eventually fined $10,000 by Commissioner Bud Selig in February, but that outburst hurt him especially when it came to MVP voting. Despite having better numbers in virtually every category and certainly being the best player on the AL's best team, Bell finished second to the Red Sox slugger Mo Vaughn. Baseball writers vote on the award after all, and baseball writers didn't like Bell very much, for obvious reasons. Apparently, neither did the kids in his neighborhood. After losing in the World Series, Bell then lost on Halloween. His house got egged by teens, probably partially because he wasn't even handing out candy, and so, like any fully grown man, Bell got into his truck and chased the teens around. A bit of stupidity that ended up with him getting fined another $1,000 for operating a moving vehicle recklessly. In 1996, Bell had another monster year on the field, with 48 homers and 148 RBIs, with his OPS over 1,000 for the 3rd straight year. He also threw at a Sports Illustrated photographer and hit him in the hand with a wayward outfield hurl. He wasn't done. Breaking up double play, Bell knocked Fernando Vina into the next decade with one of the more violent tackles you'll ever see in baseball. Vina stood just 5'9" and weighed 170 pounds at the time. It was a dangerous move that certainly seemed out of place on the baseball field. The vaunted Indians lost to the Orioles in the ALDS, but Bell, for his part, hit 2 homers, including a grand slam, in his last game with Chief Wahoo on his chest. In the offseason, Bell turned down a 5-year, $38 million deal from Cleveland to instead sign with the White Sox for 5 years and $55 million. He joined fellow slugger Frank Thomas as part of a fearsome duo. But in the first year of his contract, Bell proceeded to have his worst full season in a minute, grounding into 26 double plays while hitting just .274, pretty low by his standards, albeit with 30 homers and 116 RBIs. His return to Cleveland didn't do too well either, with Bell making obscene gestures to the fans and getting fined again. He was also arrested on domestic battery charges this year that were later dropped. He had to watch as his old team made the World Series without him, losing to the Marlins by the narrowest of margins. Would they have won with Bell? It's anyone's guess, but a little more offense in a 7-game series you lose by a single run certainly couldn't have hurt their chances. 1998 was a major comeback for him overall. He hit .328 and smashed 49 homers to go along with a mind-boggling 152 RBIs. His OPS plus of 172 led the AL. He almost repeated his 50-homer, 50-double feat. His 7.0 WAR was 7th best in the game despite his less than valuable defense. But the Sox finished under 500, and a clause in Bell's contract allowed him to become a free agent following the year. You see, he had to be among the top 3 highest paid players in the MLB, and when the Sox refused to raise his salary, Bell signed with the Orioles for 5 years and $65 million. His first season in Baltimore was a typical Albert Bell year, with an OPS plus of 143, right at his career average, along with playing in 161 games and hitting 37 homers while driving in 117 runs. At this point in his career, he had a games played streak of 392. But, unfortunately, in the background, he was developing an arthritic condition in his hip, and following this season, his pull percentage dropped and his oppo percentage rose. In 2000, his OPS plus sank to just 109, with his home run percentage of 3.7 being his lowest since 1989. By spring training 2001, Bell was done. His hip just wouldn't let him play anymore, so his career ended prematurely, which certainly cost him when it came to his eventual Hall of Fame voting. Or so the story goes. But there probably was more to it than just this. Retirement didn't seem to treat Bell much better. He was arrested twice in 2006, both times for stalking a former girlfriend. In January, Albert had placed a GPS device in the woman's car to track her, and made threatening phone calls. Following that arrest, Bell again made numerous phone calls to the woman that were intimidating, and in May, he was arrested again. In August, he was sentenced to 90 days, but was released on time served. Things then, for a while, seemed to settle down a little bit, with Bell getting married and having 3 children. Those around him seemed hopeful. He was rich beyond most people's wildest imagination. He had seemingly close relationships with his family. Things seemed to be trending in the right direction. But the arrest continued. The next one coming in March 2018, on charges of DUI and indecent exposure. A father and daughter claimed that Bell was publicly urinating in a parking lot, and when they yelled at him to stop, he shook his genitals at them. The charges were dismissed a month later. All of this came after his already violent legacy on the baseball field. During his time with the Indians, they had charged him more than $10,000 for the damage he'd caused to clubhouses at home and on the road. He had all of those violent run-ins with reporters and media members. Certainly used corked bats for points in his career. Rage and anger can lead people to fight against injustice, especially of the racial nature a young Joey had been tormented by. But Bell never seemed to find any meaningful outlet for these intense emotions. He tormented and antagonized and belittled, and his teammates in Cleveland, Chicago, and Baltimore didn't seem very sad to see him go. The only reason he was allowed to be so destructive was because of his ability to hit. Yes, he didn't have the counting numbers other guys have posted, but make no mistake, his career totals of 381 homers, a 295 average, and 144 OPS plus would probably be enough to get a more popular presence in via groups like the Veterans Committee, who've certainly elected lesser players in the past like Harold Baines, Bill Mazeroski, and Lee Smith. He made his choices in regards to the media, and it may have cost him a chance at immortality, which honestly is a bit of a sad ending to a career that could have went down as one of the best ever when it comes to peak hitting, but will now more than likely be lost to the sands of time as we get further and further from the 90s era in which he dominated. Now, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider liking and subscribing and clicking on this playlist for more essay content just like this. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.